Jeff Dean has mass in physics in the field. He's Google's chief scientist, or he oversees Gemini. He's one of maybe 10 people on Earth whose name on a document changes how the entire AI industry reads it. Today, Jeff Dean put his name on an amicus brief, a formal legal filing in support of Anthropic, his competitor. The company building the system directly rival to the one he leads. And he wasn't alone. More than 30 employees across OpenAI and Google signed the same filing, telling a federal court that if Anthropic gets punished for refusing to build a mass surveillance system, the entire field is in danger. And that happened just hours after Anthropic sued the Department of Defense in two different courts simultaneously, arguing the Pentagon's supply chain risk designation violates the First and the Fifth Amendments. The speech they're being punished for? Publicly maintaining that some capabilities shouldn't be built. I want to stay with that image for just a second. A company suing the military over the Constitution. Its competitors showing up in the same courtroom, uninvited, to defend that company. That doesn't typically happen in normal industries. The industry defending against the government, the Constitution? Something structural is forming here. So what does that actually look like when a new era starts to govern itself? Because that's what today's signal is, not one big story and some smaller ones, a series of acts of self-organization, each one in a different domain, none coordinated, but all responding to the same underlying pressure. First, let's talk about governance. Competitors enter court together. 30 plus engineers who spend their days trying to outbuild each other conclude that the field's survival depends on defending a rival's right to say no. In intelligence research, a Turing Award winner raises $1 billion to pursue a fundamentally different theory of what intelligence even is, and his investors include people who've already bet heavily on the approach that he's calling complete nonsense. They're not switching sides, they're branching. In energy, US solid-state battery company crosses the threshold from laboratory demonstration to consumer qualification, entering the commercial supply chain through industrial applications before scaling to vehicles, the same path that lithium-ion took decades ago. And then there's the biology, which I want to spend some real time on today, because what showed up in two separate papers is something I think people are going to be talking about for a really long time. Researchers found more than 200 metabolic enzymes, proteins everyone assumed belonged in the mitochondria, physically attached to DNA inside cell nuclei. And at EPL, a team engineered a single protein that functions as a Boolean logic state. It computes. One protein, two required inputs, and output only when both are present. So the cell nucleus is running its own metabolic programs, and proteins can perform logic. These are not metaphors. This is not science fiction. These are experimental results. So let me start with where I think the long-term consequences really live, the biology. The Center for Genomic Regulation's team didn't set out to find a hidden metabolic network. They were mapping what's attached to the chromatin, the complex of DNA and proteins that live inside the nucleus. And 7% of everything they found turned out to be metabolic enzymes. 7%. Proteins that every textbook places in the mitochondria doing energy work. Instead, they're sitting on the genome. And they're not just sitting there. Different cell types have different patterns. Different cancers, for example, have different patterns. The researchers call it a nuclear metabolic fingerprint. One enzyme, IMPDH2, does completely different things depending on where it is. In the nucleus, it maintains genome stability, but in the cytoplasm, it influences entirely different cellular pathways. Same molecule, different location, different function. The cancer implications are immediate. Oxidative phosphorylation enzymes were commonly found in breast cancer nuclei, but largely absent in lung cancer nuclei. Same mutations, different metabolic fingerprints, different treatment responses. So this could answer one of oncology's most persistent questions. Why do cancers with identical genetic profiles in different tissues respond so differently to the same chemotherapy? Now hold that and consider the EPFL network alongside it. Optovolution. I hope I'm saying that right. Optovolution. They used precisely timed light pulses to guide protein evolution, and they produced a protein that functioned as an AND gate. It activates a gene Only when both a light signal and a chemical signal are present simultaneously. Remove either input, nothing happens. Both present, and it fires. So standard directed evolution couldn't just produce this. It rewards proteins that stay active all the time, which destroys that switching behavior. Optevolution solved that by engineering yeast whose survival depends on the protein switching states just at the right moment. 90-minute life cycles pass or fail. 19 new protein variants came out of that. So here's what these two papers say when you read them on the same day. The nucleus isn't a library where DNA sits just waiting to be read. It's running active metabolic programs that differ by tissue and by disease. And proteins, the individual molecules, can be engineered to perform that conditional logic. Biology was already computing. We're catching up to computing with biology. We just built the resolution now to see that. And now we can start designing around it and with it. Now the lawsuits. Anthropic's legal strategy has two prongs, filed simultaneously in two different courts. The California suit argues the First Amendment retaliation. So the company took a public position on safety, as we all know, and the government punished it for that position. The DC appeal argues that the Pentagon exceeded its statutory authority. The law they used, 10 USC 3252, was designed for foreign adversary supply chain threats. Anthropic is a domestic company declining to build specific capabilities. Those are obviously different things. Now, the court filings lay bare what this is costing. Anthropic's CFO disclosed that total revenue since commercializing Claude exceeds $5 billion, and the designation threatens to erase a substantial portion of that trajectory. Now, the chief commercial officer got really granular. A $15 million financial services deal got paused. $80 million in restructured deals with unilateral cancellation rights. A Fortune 20 company whose attorneys are, his word, freaked out. Now, a grocery chain canceled a sales meeting, and it's spreading well beyond defense. GSA, Treasury, State Department, agencies with no connection to military contracting are now cutting ties preemptively. Now, the amicus brief. This is the part I want to make sure lands, because the argument itself matters more than the headline. These 30-plus employees of rival companies made three claims in the federal filing. One, Anthropic's red lines on mass surveillance and autonomous weapons represent legitimate technical and ethical concerns. Two, the designation constitutes improper retaliation against the public interest. And three, and this is the one, in the absence of comprehensive AI governance legislation, the restrictions that developers voluntarily impose on their own systems are, quoting directly, a vital safeguard against their catastrophic misuse. Sit with that. The people building the most powerful AI systems in the world are telling a federal court that developer self-restraint is currently the only functioning governance mechanism the field has, and the government is actively dismantling that. Now, I'm not anti-government. I'm not out here to say that the government's always on the bad side, although this particular administration, one could argue, probably is. But what I am saying is that this brief gets technically specific, and it should be something you pay attention to. On autonomous weapons, current AI systems cannot identify targets with perfect accuracy and can't make the contextual trade-offs between objectives and collateral damage that a human can. Hallucination risks in lethal systems make human involvement essential for now, before a munition is launched at a person. Now, on surveillance, what doesn't exist yet is the AI layer that transforms fragmented data into a unified, real-time surveillance apparatus across hundreds of millions of people. The brief argues it should stay that way. Don't create that. All right, last deep cut for today. Yann LeCun. He raised $1 billion. AMI Labs, open source, world models instead of language models. That's his thesis. Stated to Wired with his characteristic bluntness, the idea that you can extend LLM capabilities to human-level intelligence is, his words, complete nonsense. Now, that's a Turing Award winner, someone whose work made deep learning possible, and he's saying that the architecture the entire industry is organized around has a ceiling. And what matters about AMI Labs isn't whether LeCun is right. It's who's funding him. Bezos, Schmidt, Cuban, Toyota, Samsung, NVIDIA, Temasek. These are investors who've already placed large bets on language models, but they're not abandoning those bets. They're distributing capital across fundamentally different theories of what intelligence requires. And the intelligence era isn't converging on a single answer on this question. It's branching. Multiple research programs, different foundational assumptions, funded at scale and running in parallel. That is not an indecision. That's an ecosystem mature enough to explore. And that's a good thing, one of the few that the big companies are doing right now. Now, here's the arcs. Now, the Anthropic Pentagon arc has escalated through every institutional register throughout these last 6 weeks. Contract and negotiation, public refusal, supply chain risk designation on March 5th, Amadeus formal response on March 7th, federal lawsuits today, and the coalition forming around it has its own velocity. Each step seems to carry more institutional weight than the last. All right, on to batteries. March 1st brought a fluorine battery at a 700 plus watt hours per kilogram. March 4th, a 29% surge in US battery deployments. March 6th, AI identifying electrochemical interface signals that human researchers had missed. March 8th, a Raman spectroscopy pipeline for screening superionic materials. And today, a US company crosses from the qualification to the production line. The AI-enabled perception of battery physics and the physical manufacturing of next-generation cells are advancing in parallel, feeding each other. And the biological computation arc keeps gaining depth. March 7th, the fruit fly connectome embodied. A complete biological brain's perception to action loop was reproduced computationally. Today, proteins perform Boolean logic and a metabolic network discovered operating directly on the genome. The line between biologic systems and computational systems is not blurring. It was never there. We just couldn't see clearly enough to really even know that. All right, let's talk about today's human voice segment. So Jackie Bavaro and Josh Lewis came back from a week embedded in San Francisco's AI scene and described what they found in 3 words. Software got softer. And what they mean by that is that the barrier to building collapsed while they were watching. Models improving so fast that competition is just everywhere because anyone can spin up a prototype. Voice-driven coding, CLI agent interfaces, small teams scattered across geographies doing what used to require enormous infrastructure budgets. I wanted this as today's human voice because it's the individual scale experience of everything we've been talking about at the institutional scale. The lawsuits, the billion-dollar architectural bets, the governance battles, that's the macro. Bavaro and Lewis are the micro. They're builders, renegotiating what a workday looks like, what a team looks like, what a product looks like. The same transformation, but registered at the level of a Tuesday afternoon. Link to that video is in the newsletter, so check that out. All right, let's talk a little bit about what shipped. IBM released Granite 4.0 1 billion parameter speech, open source, Apache 2.0, a billion parameters, 6 languages already, #1 on the OpenASR leaderboard. Multilingual speech recognition and bidirectional translation. You can run it today. NVIDIA shipped 3 things. CUDA 13.2, extending the tile support to Ampere and Ada architectures with new Python features. AI Configurator, now open source, searches thousands of LLMs, serving configurations in seconds without live GPU time. And NemoClaw, an open source AI agent platform for enterprises that works regardless of the chip vendor. So NVIDIA building chip agnostic open source agent infrastructure. That's a sentence worth reading twice. So check that out. Also, OpenAI announced the acquisition of PromptFu, an AI security testing platform used by over a quarter of the Fortune 500. Red teaming and evaluation tools going directly into the Frontier platform. And Microsoft launched Copilot Cowork as part of Wave 3, an agentic product built with Anthropic, you all know Cowork, that autonomously handles tasks across files, email, and calendar. It ships on May 1st alongside their new Agent 365. So let's talk about the thread, everything tying together here. EPFL engineered a protein that only activates when 2 signals are present simultaneously, a biological and gate. Remove either input, nothing. Both present, it fires. I keep thinking about that as an image for what today showed us. Capability alone does not produce transformation. We've had capable systems before. An agency alone, the will to organize, to draw lines, and to build differently, that doesn't produce it either. But when both are present at the same time, competitors walk into a courtroom they didn't have to enter. A Turing Award winner builds an entire company around the conviction that the dominant approach with LLMs is wrong, and he wants something better. A battery that could blow out of the water Every battery we've ever had crosses from theory into production, and the nucleus reveals the programs that nobody even knew to look for: capability and agency. Both inputs present. The gate opens. So very soon, watch for the temporary restraining order hearing in Anthropic's case, potentially as early as Friday. If the court grants it, the designation is paused while the constitutional questions are litigated. And that hearing will be the first time that a federal judge responds on the record to the question of whether the government can punish an AI company for maintaining safety commitments. Whatever happens in that courtroom will echo for years. We'll see you tomorrow.